Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the U.S. Center. Very excited for this event on decarbonizing maritime ports. And I'm honored to introduce to the stage Undersecretary for Policy at the U.S. Department of Transportation, Carlos Maggi.
Good morning, and welcome to the U.S. Center. And on behalf of the U.S. Department of Transportation, I'm pleased to open this event. We are excited. We are an exciting moment for ports, and under President Biden's leadership, the United States is making historic investments in infrastructure and climate action. And through multilateral cooperation, the International Maritime Organization adopted milestone climate goals for global shipping. And with private sector vision, maritime stakeholders are starting work to be aligned with a 1.5 degrees Celsius world. In the United States, the bipartisan infrastructure law is improving public safety and climate resilience, creating jobs all across the country, and delivering a more equitable future. We are investing $17 billion to upgrade our nation's ports and waterways, and this includes new funding to support the U.S. Maritime Administration's Marine Highway Program and the Port Infrastructure Development Program. These historic investments will help strengthen ports, and additional climate resources will help decarbonize the maritime system. The Inflation Reduction Act, on top of the bipartisan infrastructure law, is reducing clean energy costs, incentivizing reductions in greenhouse gas emissions and criteria air pollutants, generating new economic opportunities and well-paying jobs, and creating a healthier and brighter future for communities near ports. We look forward to working with U.S. ports like the key gateway of the Port of Los Angeles to implement these laws. To coalesce climate strategies and tools for transportation, the Departments of Transportation, Energy, Housing and Urban Development, and the EPA released the U.S. National Blueprint for Transportation Decarbonization. The blueprint is a strategy for cutting all greenhouse emissions from the transportation sectors by 2050. As part of the blueprint, we are developing sector-specific action plans, and today I'm pleased to announce a preview of the U.S. Maritime Decarbonization Action Plan. The preview is available right now at transportation.gov, and it highlights decarbonization pathways for maritime and how the U.S. government is ready to help. The action plan will outline how the federal government seeks to accelerate the transition to clean options in maritime through the deployment of zero-emission fuels, technologies, energies, and vessels, positioning ports for decarbonization, strengthening the maritime workforce, and supporting inclusive collaborations. We expect to release the full action plan early next year as part of our continued work on the U.S. National Blueprint. I'm especially glad that our colleagues from the Department of Energy are here today, demonstrating a strong interagency collaboration. Jeff Meridian is actually an alum. He was our Chief Sustainability Officer before taking his very senior role at the Department of Energy. We're also working closely with our partners abroad. Our Momentum initiative is our platform for capacity building, and it's for transportation ministries and agencies abroad. Momentum shares American expertise with the global audience and creates an opportunity for us to work cooperatively towards better transportation outcomes. I'm pleased to announce that under Momentum, we released a guide on decarbonizing the maritime shipping industry, and the guide focuses on ports and terminals. I encourage you to visit our Momentum website for more details. Earlier this year, the International Maritime Organization took a big step forward on decarbonization. As Secretary Buttigieg shared in his video remarks during the IMO assembly, the United States strongly supports the progress made with the 2023 IMO greenhouse gas strategy, and this includes well-to-wake life cycle approaches to emissions. It is critical to get the science right, and I would like to invite you to join DOT for an international event that we're having later today at 12:30 at the Ocean Pavilion. And this is going to be about science-informed policymaking, research, education, and workforce development. Hope to see you there. We can't talk about ports without talking about supply chains. And today, DOT is taking action through our Freight Logistics Optimization Works. It's a bad name, but a great acronym, FLOW. It's our FLOW initiative. It's the first of its kind digital initiative, and what it's doing is getting all of the stakeholders in the supply chain working together to share data, something we've talked about for a long time, but we're actually delivering. Many businesses are taking bold steps on maritime decarbonization as well, and we applaud the leadership of Blue Sky Maritime Coalition, the Zero Emission Maritime Buyers Alliance, and we welcome private sector engagement and subnational initiatives on developing green shipping corridors. DOT is partnering across the government and stakeholders to help launch the green shipping corridors in the Great Lakes systems and between the United Kingdom and the U.S. Now is the moment to deepen and accelerate our climate action. The United States is committed to taking on this challenge. Thank you for your commitment. Look forward to working with you on marine decarbonization. To guide us through this important discussion, I'm very pleased to introduce my colleague, a mentor of mine, Annie Petzonk, who's Assistant Secretary for Aviation and International Affairs at USDOT. She has spent her career doing this, and she will be moderating our panel discussion. So thank you.
Thanks, Carlos, and welcome to our guests. I'm pleased to be here with leaders in the maritime decarbonization area, and I'm going to call them to the podium now. Jennifer States, Vice President and Chief Strategy Officer for the Blue Sky Maritime Coalition. Ingrid Irigoyen, who's the President and CEO of ZEMBA, the Zero Emission Maritime Buyers Alliance, and she's also Associate Director of Ocean and Climate at the Aspen Institute. My friend Jeff Meridian, who's the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy, EERE, an office we know and love at the Department of Energy, the U.S. Department of Energy, and we'll be joined shortly by David Lebatique from the Port of Los Angeles. And I'll introduce David when he arrives. We're going to discuss 4 topics that are critical to aligning ports with a 1.5 degree world: finance and investment, workforce development, community engagement, and supply chains. I'm going to turn to each panelist, and you'll have 2 minutes apiece to introduce yourself a little bit further and provide some framing remarks, and then we're going to get into these 4 questions. Jennifer, to you.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you to the organizers of the event, State Department and the U.S. Department of Transportation, for inviting us to participate. We're very honored to be part of this stellar panel of speakers and to be here today. Blue Sky Maritime's coalition mission is to accelerate the transition of net zero waterborne transportation to accelerate the transition of waterborne transportation to net zero greenhouse gas emissions for the U.S. and Canada. So we focus on domestic, inland, Great Lakes, and coastal decarbonization. We're an industry-led, member-based consortium with 120 entities across the entire value chain. This includes ship owner-operators, charterers, technology companies, fueling producers and providers, financial entities, plus ports, academic institutions, NGOs, and more. We are a coalition of the willing. All members provide in-kind support and leadership for our work streams, where we're driving action through collaborative projects. Our roadmap to net zero emissions for North American waterborne transportation was just published, and there'll be a press conference on the 11th that Megan will be representing us at if you want to hear more. But we identify 6 key challenges and actions in order to address our mission. So for today's discussion, I think it is important that we note the differences in domestic versus deep sea shipping, which is very global in nature. Most of our members are not subject to IMO regulations, and so we are lacking the demand signals to drive the decarbonization in our financial decisions. The lifespan of U.S. flag and Jones Act fleet is an average of 37 years. We have vessels that are operating, they're up to 90 years old. So things that are built today will be operating in 2050 when the globe has gone to net zero. So our global fleets so our domestic fleets right now are really being forced to wait for the fueling field to narrow down and to technology to mature. A few of our first movers are really building some of the new pilots and demonstration projects. But it's a big price difference, and typically it involves government support in order to move these projects forward. This is nowhere near the scale that is needed to move the needle on bringing down the risks and the costs, nor driving the demand for the production and distribution at scale that is needed for the infrastructure build-out. So we really do have to do more together to drive public and private investments in uptake of zero-emission technology to reach commercialization and scale to ensure our domestic fleets are not left behind globally. And I look forward to talking about some ideas on how to do just that.
Thanks very much, Jennifer. Ingrid, let's turn to you. Please introduce yourself and give some framing remarks.
Great. Thank you so much. Yes, I'm Ingrid Irigoyen. I'm with the Aspen Institute, which is a not-for-profit organization headquartered in Washington, D.C., although we have a lovely campus in Aspen, Colorado. You're all invited to come there to talk about the ocean. I also now lead the Zero Emission Maritime Buyers Alliance. And as the Aspen Institute, we do a lot of things, work on a lot of different issues. Energy and environment is one of the most important sort of strategic priorities for our organization. And my background is in ocean and coastal sustainability more broadly. Have interacted with the maritime industry for most of my career because it is such an important user of ocean space and resources. And a few years ago, we were dissecting the challenge in maritime and really trying to hone in on what is the core challenge at play. And of course, it is the massive to-do list related to this transition to zero-emission fuels. And fundamentally, that to-do list is challenged by what is predicted across the board, everyone agrees, a cost differential between fossil fuels, which are cheap, particularly the kind that are used in ships, and the new alternative fuels that need to be on a pathway to zero. And how do we make a switch in a situation where there are such intensive infrastructure needs and so many actors need to move when there isn't presently sufficient policy to actually drive that transition at the pace necessary? Much of that falls on the IMO, but also domestic governments. And then furthermore, the need for there to be a strong demand signal. So we are interested in working in the policy space. We're interested in working with cargo owners. And for that reason, and cargo owners, by the way, for those who aren't aware, if you're new to the maritime space, I'm referring to the freight buyers, so the people whose goods are being moved by ship. And in our case, our scope is quite global in terms of that work. But as a proud American and recognizing that many of the companies we work with are U.S.-based companies, they are often, very interested in what is the point of view of the U.S. public and U.S. consumers related to such issues. And of course, we have very important ports and the communities surrounding those ports that are impacted by the decisions that we make today about how we are going to drive this transition and ensuring that we do that in a way that communities will be comfortable with and really seize the opportunity. And this is a major focus of our work, is not just focusing on the bad news, which is, cost, but one person's cost is another person's tremendous economic opportunity. And in the United States, we have the potential to, I believe, achieve a bipartisan groundswell of support if we're very thoughtful in the way that we craft the opportunities going forward. And I know that the administration is doing so much in terms of infrastructure and the IRA and to help sort of spread the benefits of these transitions to communities across the nation. So this is something that we're very interested in helping to support in the U.S. context as the Institute. But then also as we work with cargo owners, we are working with them to do things like advanced market commitments so that we can actually catalyze the transition and a business case for further investment. So significant volumes of freight, longer-term contracting periods, initially a price discovery exercise, but then continuing to iterate on a sort of a joint procurement strategy that allows the full value chain to start to enjoy those economic opportunities. And so our corporate partners, our group is ever growing. I'll say a little bit more about that later on in the session. But I will say that about half of our companies are U.S. companies, and they are really interested in ensuring that our ports are clean and modern, the digitalization, the transparency on emissions, the carbon accounting, all of this is very important to American businesses, and I'm privileged to have the opportunity to share a little bit of their perspective, as I understand it, in our daily work with them. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Ingrid. Deputy Assistant Secretary Meridian, over to you.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everybody. Great to start off the morning here. Let me first just say thank you to the incredible team here at the U.S. Center for producing some great events here at COP28. Really appreciate all of the work and thoughtfulness that you've put into it. It's really wonderful to share the stage with some great panelists. Jennifer, Ingrid, I see David walking in right now, and of course, Annie, who I think is probably one of the most important leaders in the sustainable fuels effort that we've got right now, working in government and really working in this space in the country. At the Department of Energy, we are deeply committed to reaching President Biden's goal of a net zero economy by 2050. We've got two key approaches to doing that, as our Secretary Jennifer Granholm talks about often. The first is deploying clean energy technologies across the entire ecosystem, and certainly there are a number of areas that are specific to the maritime sector where that applies. And then second is leveraging all of the tools that we've got to support research and development that will allow us to get those technologies deployed, commercialized, and at scale. We've got some unique resources, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, of course, the Inflation Reduction Act, and at DOE, I think we've got one of the most valuable resources across the federal government, which is our network of 17 national labs who are really driving this advanced research and development that's going to get us there. Carlos talked about our national transportation strategy. We're particularly proud at DOE to be a partner in that effort with DOT and several of our other sister agencies. This is the work that we are focused on implementing across the board. It requires a whole of government approach, and it requires collaboration with industry, with folks across the spectrum. So honored to be here, and look forward to talking a little bit more about the work that we're doing at the Department of Energy.
Thanks so much, Jeff. And perfect timing. Let me welcome David Libatique, who is the Deputy Executive Director for Stakeholder Engagement at the Port of Los Angeles. David, do you want to you just speak into it? It'll go on automatically.
Sure. Thank you.
And please introduce yourself and give a couple of minutes of framing comments.
I'm David Libatique. I'm Deputy Executive Director at the Port of LA. We specialize in just-in-time delivery, which is why I just slipped in at the last moment. The Port of LA is the busiest container port in the United States, and it's the main gateway for seaborne trade with the Pacific Rim. For the past 17 years, we've been working on a comprehensive port emissions reduction program we call the Clean Air Action Plan, which is a comprehensive collaborative framework that established goals, established specific measures by type of equipment, as well as annual inventories to keep ourselves accountable. So it's been phenomenally successful in reducing criteria pollutants. And what we're looking at doing is taking the same kind of collaborative framework and model, but applying it on a much larger scale, applying it globally, and applying it through green shipping corridors. So really excited about the level of commitment and resolve coming from our corridor partners, and just excited to be here. So thank you for having me, and again, sorry I'm late.
Thanks, David. Now turning to our four topics: investment, workforce, community engagement, and supply chain. I'm going to ask the first question to Ingrid. Since you spoke about how this transition does cost money, how are the cargo owners working with ports and carriers to facilitate investment in the transition?
Absolutely. Well, this is one of the big challenges that we are really tackling head on. The challenge is that for many cargo owners, these are major multinationals that really heavily depend on shipping to bring us the goods that we rely on for a high quality of life. Very important to the global economy. And so they have an interest not only in ensuring the decarbonization of this sector so that they can meet their obligations to society and their public climate commitments in many cases, which are very ambitious, rightfully so, and we applaud them for that. But they also want to ensure that shipping continues to be an affordable way of moving transport. It is the least carbon intensive of all modes to get across the ocean already. And of course, to ensure that their supply chains continue to be resilient and able to withstand the transition. And so part of the interest that they have is making investments now, early in the transition, while it is still coming at a premium. And I think this is the real challenge that we faced for a long time, is how can we enable corporate partners to come together, actually help cover some of that cost differential, not necessarily all of it, but some of it to kickstart this transition, while on the policy side we get organized, which can take time, to create that even playing field that industries across the board on climate action need, right? We need the zero emission solutions to be able to compete with low-cost fossil fuels and do that in a way that will continue to maintain economic vitality and a high quality of life. And so cargo owners are very interested in kicking this transition off right away because they understand that if we start now, the transition will be smoother, it'll be more affordable, and they'll be able to have some influence on it in a way that they otherwise might not. And so we are organizing them through a group we call Cargo Owners for Zero Emission Vessels, where we're engaging in the policy space. We've been bringing climate-leading cargo owners to the IMO to share their point of view on why high ambition is so important, why that even playing field is so necessary for first movers to continue to make the investments that they need to make. And then, of course, through our Zero Emission Maritime Buyers Alliance, also very focused on building that business case for the initial deployment of zero-emission fuels and technologies. We define zero for now as at least 90% emissions reduction on a life cycle basis, which really is asking the industry to stretch into new fuels and technologies. What's currently available in the market commercially cannot reach that emissions reduction typically, maybe some drop in biofuels in some particular cases. But we're also interested in fuels and technologies that can be vastly scalable. So with scale, will those cost reductions be enabled? This is a very important criterion for us. We want to be supporting those fuels and technologies that can actually get us to the long term. And that is going to require economies of scale and also being quite thoughtful about some of the factors that will be important to portside communities, like safety, ensuring that these new fuels are handled and stored properly. For the crew of these vessels, are they going to be safe? Are they going to be sufficiently trained? And I know we'll talk about workforce in just a moment. So cargo owners are making investments through our Buyers Alliance. And these are advanced market commitments. We have a tender right now that we're in the middle of running, and we have bids in hand for a pretty significant volume of freight. Our initial RFP is for 600,000 20-foot containers to be essentially fully decarbonized. And then this is the first round, and we'll do it again. And next year, we'll be exploring some opportunities to actually adapt our approach to be more inclusive. We're focused on the container segment now. We'd like to be able to bring other segments in, which will be tremendously important for the inland waterways and other aspects of shipping that are not just deep water, and be able to really harness their interest in decarbonizing not just their deep sea shipping, but also port handling equipment and drayage, and then the linkage, that multimodal linkage, because for these companies, it's the full transport that matters, not just the ocean. We're laser focused on the ocean because that's the hard piece, but companies really are investing and collaborating with their suppliers to try and create efficiency and support this transition to new fuels and technologies.
Thank you, Ingrid. Thanks. And as you think about it, I mean, look around this room. Think about the chair you're sitting in, the lights above us, all the materials, your laptop, your cell phone. How much of that came to you or came to here by ship? Taking all of that shipping, which is currently going by heavy marine fossil fuels, and converting that to new zero-emitting fuels is an enormous undertaking. Jeff, let me ask you. Ingrid talked about moving to entirely new fuels. The Department of Energy is doing considerable work on hydrogen. What can you tell us about what's going on there and its relationship to ships?
Sure. Well, I could talk a lot about hydrogen, but I will be very succinct and just say that I think those of you who pay attention to the work we do at DOE know that in October we announced the recipients of our Hydrogen Hubs Awards. This is a program that we are fortunate to be able to deploy because of the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act. This is a $7 billion effort to create regional economies around both the production and the creation of demand around clean hydrogen. There are, we know that there's not just one technology that's going to get us over the finish line when it comes to decarbonizing our economy. There are a number of different approaches, and that's why the work that we're doing in clean hydrogen is so important. There's certainly an application in a number of sectors, including maritime, both for vessels, for the surrounding infrastructure around ports, and communities that live in those areas as well. It's important to note, though, that we're making other investments when it comes to clean hydrogen. We've got a $1.5 billion investment in supporting research and development through our national lab system. We've also invested $1 billion specifically focused on the demand side of hydrogen. And this effort is designed to be regional in scope, looking not just at the creation of and the supply of hydrogen, but also the jobs, the economic opportunity, and all of the things that we know are so critical in order to bring all Americans along in this clean energy transition.
It's one thing for large vessel owners and major shippers in global shipping to talk about investing in new technologies, but it's a whole different thing when you get down to inland shipping, local shipping, and regional. Jennifer, where does the segment of the industry that you work with go from here to finance zero and near zero technologies?
Well, the maritime industry can make investments, but it is when there is certainty in the path forward and that we know that those investments are going to be there for the long term with our 50-year lifespan or 30-year lifespan of vessels. Unfortunately, we're not at that point yet regarding the market demand, the regulatory landscape, or narrowing in on the basket of fuels that we're looking at. U.S. policy for maritime does lean towards the carrot with incentives versus mandates and regulations. And on that note, I really want to take a moment to highlight the U.S. leadership in the passage and rapid implementation of what truly is probably the biggest carrot in the history of U.S. climate policy, the Inflation Reduction Act. It truly is a game changer where we managed to leapfrog other nations in some of the tax credits and incentives. This is essentially a new industrial policy document that is supporting carbon capture, storage, and transport, alternative fuel production, including the hydrogen hubs, some utilization, as well as storage solutions and the renewable energy that is needed to generate our future e-fuels. The bipartisan legislation is a success story that really is beginning to transform our energy and fuel landscape. But we do still need to go further, especially on the utilization side for maritime. We need dedicated maritime funding incentives, especially for our Jones Act and U.S. flag vessels and shipyards. I would propose that we implement something like the Maritime Sustainable Fuel Grand Challenge, leveraging the work that's been done with the Sustainable Aviation Fuel Grand Challenge. The new EPA Clean Ports funding has $3 billion for zero emissions technology, but we do need to keep it focused on port infrastructure and harbor craft. The U.S. Maritime Decarbonization Action Plan that was just mentioned, really looking forward to a forthcoming workshop where we can get industry feedback. We really want to bring industry to the table and help work on what we can do on this roadmap and actions together. We also need flexibility in the funding mechanisms. We need technology agnostic approaches that provide for emission reduction alternatives that are often at mixed technology readiness levels. The good news is there are new mechanisms to enable this approach. This includes the Center for Maritime Innovation at the Department of Transportation under MARAD and the new DOE Foundation for Energy Security and Innovation. These offer exciting new opportunities for collaboration and public-private partnership models that can shape investments on both sides across technologies and sectors. But we need appropriations of resources for these to move forward. So look forward on finding solutions together on how we can do this.
And I'll also add that the Department of Transportation's Federal Transit Administration just announced a funding opportunity for electrification of ferries. So,
we're big on in Washington State.
At the heart of the transition will be the workforce. We must put people first. And David, let me turn to you to give some thoughts on what the Port of Los Angeles is doing in terms of connecting with the workforce for this important transition.
Really important question. Workforce is a critical component of decarbonization. To provide some context, at the Port of Los Angeles, we move 9 million container units a year, 7 major container terminals. Collectively, they handle about 1,800 vessels per year, averaging about 1,100 container exchanges per vessel. There's about 2,000 pieces of cargo handling equipment across those terminals. 20,000 drayage trucks operate in and out of those ports, out of those terminals, and about 7,000 trains arrive or depart on an annual basis. And so at each one of those stages, decarbonization is going to mean introduction of new technology, and each one of those stages involves a human, involves a worker. And so you really have to put the worker at the center of your thought process about how to navigate that transition. So there are a couple things we're working on at the Port of LA. First, Jeff mentioned it. So we supported the terminals and the workforce identifying projects as part of the hydrogen hub application that California put forward. We were really happy that California was selected as one of the recipients of the hydrogen hub, but we were really heartened and encouraged by the level of collaboration and engagement between the employers and the workforce. Secondly, the port itself is taking on a more assertive role in workforce readiness. So we have an expanded role in preparing the workforce. So we're working with Longshore Labor, the employers, and the Port of Long Beach to establish a workforce training center to really connect the dots. What we identified through our Clean Air Action Plan and our technology advancement efforts is that unless you create that infrastructure to upskill and reskill and transition the workforce, you really put yourself at a disadvantage in accelerating that decarbonization effort.
Thank you, David. Given that we're running short on time, I'm going to ask for each of our remaining panelists to provide 1 more minute on what you're doing with regard to the workforce. I'm going to start with Jeff, and then we'll go to community engagement.
Sure. Well, let me just say I had the opportunity to visit both the Port of Long Beach and the Port of LA not too long ago, and the work that is being done out there, not only from a technology deployment perspective, but also from a workforce development and community engagement and workforce engagement approach is really powerful. It's really meaningful. In the Biden-Harris administration, workforce development, jobs, equity, as we hear the president talk about so often, those are not ancillary components of the work that we do. They're very much at the heart and soul of the work that we do. And as a result, collaborations with organized labor are particularly important when it comes to workforce development. All of the funding opportunities that we provide at the Department of Energy, irrespective of what the subject matter is, are very focused on the workforce development component of this. That is particularly important because we've got a lot of folks working in clean energy, but we know that we need to get a lot more folks across the country engaged in order to meet the president's targets that are going to get us to that net zero economy. So we're very focused on ensuring that everything that we do also brings the community along with it.
Thanks. Ingrid, 1 minute.
But just very briefly, I would say, for all of our member companies, in addition to environment and environmental quality and sustainability, I would say I could probably say universally that they are all equally interested in ensuring that they are good corporate citizens and addressing community concerns. When it comes to technology transitions, communities always have concerns. Every major technology transition that has ever happened in human history, people are worried. They're worried about jobs. They're worried about safety. We need to really listen. We need to take account of those points of view, have open information exchange. And in the U.S., we're pretty good at community participation and sort of a lot of public process. But we can always make improvements. And I think the companies that we work with are tremendously interested in ensuring that that's the case. And also, I think it's worth saying that, many of the communities around ports are, of course, also interested in local air pollution, as you probably are dealing with all the time in the Port of Los Angeles. And so ensuring that we're really describing the full benefits of the transition to communities. It's not just about climate. It's also about ensuring that their children's asthma rates can go down, that there's less cancer around the port communities. It's about ensuring our national security as well, to ensure that we have the most modern maritime fleet possible. So there are many, many benefits beyond simply climate change. And I know that the administration is often, focusing on those other benefits as well. And I would say that for our companies, that's also very important, is that we ensure that we're doing this right.
Thank you. Jennifer, on workforce, and then I'll also come back to you on community engagement.
I can link the two and try to keep it short. In the maritime industry, we really have a severe workforce challenge that we're facing right now. And one example is in Washington State, our ferries are operating at reduced schedules because we don't have enough pilots, and also the O&M schedules to keep up with the maintenance. And our ferry is attempting to go all electric. The future plans are that they're all going to be hybrid electric going forward. And we're struggling on the building side of that as well, trying to keep it domestic within Washington State. So there's huge opportunities in the maritime workspace right now, let alone addressing all of the new different technologies that we're looking at with this basket of fuels and battery solutions as well. So really what we need to focus on is raising the visibility of the maritime industry with our communities and understanding what these opportunities are. Pardon my uncouth language, but the maritime industry is what I like to call pale, male, and stale. We really need to be raising the visibility in different communities about what these jobs are, what these opportunities are, how well paid they are, and that they are safe and they are focused on sustainability. I had an employee at a previous job that when they heard Washington State Ferries was going electric, dropped what they were doing as a chef and decided to enroll right away in an apprenticeship program because it was the fact that they thought that maritime wasn't clean that was holding them back. So we need to work within our communities with the parents and help them understand that these are good pathways for jobs. And then we need to work with our unions and our labor force with the just transition side of really getting to how do we do the training for the new technologies, how do we address digitalization, autonomy, and some of these challenges together, and making sure that we're providing the training that's needed to enable the workforce of the future and having the full level of employees that we need to make that happen.
David, I want to turn to you on community engagement. That is something that's been a hallmark of the Port of Los Angeles' operations, and give us your thoughts in terms of engaging local communities on this important transition. Communities are going to have questions about the new fuels, the safety of the fuels, and the implications. How are you handling that?
Really important question. Last month we participated in a community workshop on green shipping corridors. I think it's the first on green shipping corridors that we've had in a community. It was hosted by Pacific Environment and C40 Cities. The level of genuine interest and support for green shipping corridors is special, but it places us at a really critical juncture where I think we need to embrace that engagement with local communities now and the broader public and get them into the conversation in a meaningful way. The couple of messages that have come across to us is, Ingrid raised it, decarbonization, GHG reduction is important, but don't forget air quality. Don't forget that public health is really the bottom line for a lot of these fence line communities. And also trust. It's a scarce, it's a perishable commodity. So we just need to make sure that process, transparency, accountability are there. They count for a lot, and that's why a lot of the groups, a lot of the activists, a lot of the community members seek enforceable commitments. Really tricky proposition when you're talking about green shipping corridors because such a complex mix of international, national, state, and local regulation and policy objectives. But you have to engage in that conversation. Again, a trust, accountability, but transparency in the process. And you begin that by getting them engaged in the discussion now. And so we've started that process in LA, and again, there's a lot of support in the community. They want to see us follow through on these commitments.
It's now time to wrap up, and so I'm going to give you each 1 minute for closing. And in your 1 minute, if you can address the implications of the green shipping transition for supply chains along the way. Thanks. Jennifer, starting with you.
All right. Well, to accelerate emission reductions, and action for emission reductions, we really need an unprecedented levels of collaboration across the entire value chain. And that public support that can level the playing field, as Ingrid mentioned, as well as the public-private partnerships that are needed to drive uptake of new technologies for emission reductions. We need the uptake and we need the infrastructure, and both sides need to work together. So together we can advance the actions needed to accelerate the reductions, but collaboration is key. We want to work with you, with the public sector, the private sector, to find and implement solutions. We're working to advance the collaborative constructs that are critical to forming the partnerships and making real progress. We need the knowledge sharing, and we need to also create connections globally to really join together in this green transition and what we're doing. We really are a globally connected supply chain. I just returned from a delegation trip to Denmark where we visited the biggest ports that are building that supply chain right now at the port communities because they're so big you can't transport them on land. And at the same time, we're seeing increases in shipping. And so really in the U.S., we need to be thinking about the collaborative approach in our ports and the demand for space and scale of this great offshore wind build-out together with the fueling, charging infrastructure and carbon capture and storage and everything that is going to be happening within our port hubs with very tight demands for space. It's a supply chain build-out at an unprecedented scale. And we really need to understand and see what's happening globally and make sure we're doing an integrated approach regionally with our port communities as well.
Thanks, Jennifer. Ingrid, over to you, 1 minute.
Yes, so much of the work that we do is related to helping to kickstart the transition to the new fuels and technologies and get the supply chains for those activated. Now, all we can do with voluntary willingness to pay a premium for a better service is kickstart a transition. In the long run, to get to scale, we do need a lot of policy support, and we're very hopeful that the IMO will create that even playing field that we've been talking about in the coming months. But shipping also is important to every other supply chain, and as you've pointed out, everything around us, for the most part, has come across the ocean on a vessel. And so ensuring that we start right away on this transition is tremendously important so that the transition is smooth, so that our supply chains continue to be strong and resilient, and increasingly so as time goes on. Of course, we need to also then be very clear-eyed about the opportunities that we can seize in the United States to make this truly an opportunity for ourselves economically. My strong belief is that, and I would say to many of my fellow citizens, whether you believe that climate change should be a priority or not, what matters is that the rest of the world does, and that the maritime industry will decarbonize. And we have a choice as Americans. We can either allow this transition to unfold and we follow, or do what I believe, as a proud American, we're very good at, which is leading the way and making the investments necessary, finding the economic opportunity, and trying to do that in a way that is going to be fair and equitable, not only globally, but also for our communities in the United States. And so we're very excited about where we are in this transition already and the conversations that are happening at the U.S. government level and, of course, subnationally and with many of the private sector stakeholders coming together. I believe we can get this done, and if we use the rational, logical part of our brains, we can actually really harness this as a major opportunity, not just for climate change, but also for our economy and for our people.
Thank you, Ingrid. Jeff,
Great.
to you for closing.
Well, the global clean energy market is estimated to be valued over the next 10 years at about $23 trillion. The International Energy Agency has suggested that there are upwards of 46 technologies that will help us achieve our decarbonization goals broadly. But right now, only 6 of those are commercially available and ready to be deployed at scale. So we have a lot of work collectively to do in order to get those technologies ready for full deployment. So many of those technologies impact the work that happens in and around ports and surrounding communities. And so it's critical that we continue to partner with labor, with industry, with all of the partners that are here on stage in order to advance those technologies, in order to build the capacity and the buy-in in local communities, in order to create the jobs that we know are going to be necessary, not only to get those technologies ready to deploy, but actually to deploy them and to do so at an accelerated pace.
Thanks, Jeff. David, bring us home.
Since COP26 and the Clydebank Declaration, the Port of LA has announced about 7 different green shipping corridors, and each one of them are different. 2 of them we're working on actively. Our hope is that these are going to capture a lot of the innovation, the leadership, and the resolve that these private sector partners have. Where we see the opportunity is that these green shipping corridors really offer the only platform where systems thinking is really at play. Traditionally, from the port standpoint, climate action and infrastructure and data and efficiency and workforce, they were all siloed discussions. They're converging now in green shipping corridors. And the pandemic really revealed a lot of why that's all interconnected. We'd love to see alignment between the private and public sector leadership as accelerated and facilitated through the green shipping corridors, but aligned with the policy and program that's available at the state and the federal government, and then really also capture that energy and get that response from the cargo owners as well. And so if all of those are pushing in the same direction, we want to see it move from green shipping corridors where it's just port pairs to port chains to really port networks. And so we'd like to see them proliferate.
David, thanks so much. Let's take that systems approach forward, each of us in our own work, reach out across the silos, and let's get this done. Thank you.